Hello again, welcome back. Nice to see you. This week, more feedback as promised from the European Petrochemical Association's annual meeting in Berlin in early October, with a focus on what went on during the supply chain and logistics business session. It was an interesting introduction from Dirk Verstraeten of Covestro, who's just taken over this year as chair of the Supply Chain Programme Committee, who set out some of the fundamental challenges that the chemical industry's logistics service provider partners are facing at the moment. And in the end, it all points to rail as the solution, which is not something that the chemical industry is unaware of. And I think there's been a lot of desire on the part of chemical manufacturers to ship more by rail, but there have been problems. On the other hand, in the last couple of years, there's some factors have really come to the fore that have made it yet more attractive. For instance, variable water on the Rhine has had an impact on the German chemical industry in particular. It's been hard to have dependable barge volumes because of low water. The barges can't travel full or can't travel at all if the water gets too low. And the low water may, of course, have something to do with climate change and may point towards an even more urgent need for sustainable operations. There's also an immense amount of investment going into the petrochemical cluster in the Port of Antwerp, which is great news for employment in the Port of Antwerp, but more difficult in terms of problems of road congestion around the port. Antwerp is digging another road tunnel under Scheldt, but that's going to be a few years yet before it's completed. And meanwhile, of course, it's going to make road congestion even worse on the ring road. So that too points to more use of rail transport. Jacques van der Maren, who's CEO of the Port of Antwerp Authority, was speaking during this session at the EPCA meeting. And he noted that he wants to see a doubling in rail volumes by 2030. Now, bearing in mind that at the moment, he says that only 7% of the traffic, chemical traffic through the port moves by rail, and that in Hamburg, for instance, the proportion is more like 40%. You can see that that's doable. But on the other hand, he said, actually, we have no idea when and where these trains are entering the port because they can't get information from the infrastructure operator, Infrabel, which seems bizarre in this day and age where everything is interconnected. You would think that that information would be there. And what he said was that he can see the Port Authority moving from being in the position of a passive landlord, if you like, to a more proactive player, encouraging companies to move to rail transport, as the Port of Antwerp Authority is already doing in terms of barge movements. But most interesting, I thought, from this session was Benny Kuntz from HCB, who described very well the impact of the Rastatt closure on Rhine corridor movements. It was back in 2017. And the problems it highlighted about the lack of interoperability and the fact that Antwerp to Basel corridor relies really just on two tracks. Now, if the chemical industry is going to get a dependable supply chain using rail, something some investment, some serious investment has to be made in putting in capacity. He also pointed out that there's been a backlog of maintenance for a long time now. And for those viewers in North America, I think the same situation applies there. Of course, what's happening now is money is being released for that maintenance to happen, but there's no coordination of that work broadly across Europe. So if a line is down for maintenance, you can't necessarily rely on going another way. And certainly if you need to go into another country, then your drivers need to be able to speak that language too, which is something that Rastat highlighted too. So for rail, yes, we want it, but governments need to invest, and they need to think about how industry is going to use it. And they also need to think, it's very difficult to get the balance right between passenger rail and freight rail. But the one illustration I thought made it clear was that a lot of people are sitting in their cars a lot of the time, a lot of days around the major cities and hubs and ports in traffic jams. And when they're sitting in traffic jams, they're looking around them at all the other vehicles, and they may well start thinking that why aren't all these freight wagons moving by rail instead of sitting in the traffic with me and holding things up? So if we can get individuals to think that way, then maybe pressure can be put on governments to do something about rail capacity. I'm sure this story will run and run. I should probably be returning to it next year, if not before. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.